everything is sexist.
Unpopular opinion. Men's domestic violence shelters are a misuse of nonprofit funding. Imagine how completely disconnected one has to be from society and reality in order to make such a claim. Okay, according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, we know that 1 in 4 women, 24.3%, and 1 in 7 men, 13.8%, aged 18 and older in the U.S., have been the victim of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. News came out this month that a domestic violence shelter for male survivors opened in Batesville, Arkansas. According to this article, it is the first shelter for male survivors in the country. The first one in the country. In the whole of the United States, there is only one. Keep that in mind, guys. I'm not sure if this is in fact the case, but the fact that the author believes this to be the case is significant nonetheless. Several people on my Facebook newsfeed, an extremely scientific sample, posted this news happily, and while the increase in resources for domestic violence survivors is a good thing, I think we need to be careful before we get too excited about this. Why? Because of bitchy feminists protesting men's shelters for domestic abuse, or even bitchy feminists going so far as to protest a showing for a movie about men's issues. Before I get to Debbie Downer, I want to first acknowledge that male survivors of domestic violence are a real and important thing, and male survivors face stigma and other gendered issues that women don't. Enough said. Men that have survived domestic violence should have resources, and in a perfect world, there would be shelters for men everywhere they are needed. Oh, okay, you're going to continue. But the problem is we don't live in a perfect world of unlimited resources, and money going towards this shelter means that money did not go towards other services for women. Won't someone please think of the women who already have women's domestic abuse shelters and also who have women's college centers that men don't have at all, who make up about 80% of domestic violence victims and survivors, according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. In the case of the Batesville shelter, the founders themselves said that the other option was a transitional shelter for women leaving the emergency shelter program. Further, from October to early February, only 5 men have used this 9-bed facility. Only 5 men? Oh, well then what's the point if only 5 men have used it? Those 5 men can go fuck themselves for all you care, right? Because of the gender disparity of survivors, it's likely that these resources would have served many more women at this point. Listen, fam, I'm sure that to those 5 men, that bedding and shelter made all the difference in the world. In fact, a 2012 report from Domestic Violence Arkansas says ongoing funding cuts to our transitional housing program means that victims stay in shelters longer. This longer stay results in fewer beds available in emergency shelter for other survivors. In the face of cuts to transitional shelters for women that lead to crowding of emergency shelters, diverting resources to create underused facilities doesn't seem like the best use of resources. Once again, it's not that these 5 men didn't deserve gender-competent services, because they absolutely do. Ideally, every survivor would have this access. But at the end of the day, this means that women who would have taken advantage of the transitional shelter didn't receive services that they could have used. Oh, that's right, not enough services for women. Listen here, buddy. There are literally hundreds of women's shelters to help women across the country, probably thousands. I don't know the exact number. And there's only one men's shelter, apparently, according to you. If we have to help every single woman before we can even begin to start helping men, then what are we even doing? Is feminism a first oppression, first help basis? Or are y'all for the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes now? By the way, that's no longer the Google definition of the word.
Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
Right now, it's the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes, whereas it used to be...
Feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of political, social, and economic equality to men.
Okay, so that being said, you guys really have to stop pretending that your efforts are for the betterment of the sexes now, if not because of the definition change based on this article and the various reactions of feminists to any attempt to bring light to men's issues. I don't want a woman's shelter if that means that a man has to sleep on the streets because we don't have the housing to support men's domestic abuse victims, okay? I don't need that shelter. They do. It is also important to remember that the men have not gone without services. They would have just been housed with women, although the men's shelter hugely benefits women since they don't have to share housing with men. We're in a pickle, aren't we? Do we benefit women while not benefiting men, or do we benefit women even if it benefits men? The struggle is real. Some survivors of interpersonal violence are LGBT folks, so single-sex housing doesn't eliminate the situation of a person being housed with their abuser. Why would an abuser go to a domestic violence shelter for those suffering from domestic violence to be sheltered for domestic violence victims? Just curious. I am perhaps especially wary of domestic violence shelters for men because one of men's rights activists' rallies cries is, why aren't there any domestic violence shelters for men? That's your reason for being wary? Because men's rights activists want some action in terms of equality and alleviation of their systematic hardships? Someone tell me if this is satire or not, because I really can't tell. They ask this without ever acknowledging that the whole reason that interpersonal violence is even seen as problematic in the first place is because of feminism. Oh, well, that's certainly a lot to take credit for. Where's your source for that, though? I really wish that we had the resources for all survivors of interpersonal violence could get all the services that they needed, including men, women, and genderqueer people. You know, you probably do wish that, so long as women get first dibs, right? Equality. Ideally, we would have the resources to eradicate interpersonal violences, but that's a whole other thing. In a vacuum, why aren't there domestic violence shelters for men seems like a reasonable question. However, we don't live in a vacuum, and this presumes a false equivalency, that men and women face the same circumstances. This is, of course, not true for a million reasons, but the fact that 80% of survivors are women... Okay, I gotta stop you right there. Okay? Based on the information that the link provides, the last fact statistic states that most female victims of intimate partner violence were previously victimized by the same offender, including 77% of females ages 18 to 27, 76% of females ages 25 to 34, and 81% of females ages 35 to 49. Those percentages in the 80s, high 70s had to do with repeat victims who were previously victimized by the same partner. That is to say that they questioned females who had been victims of assault, a good chunk of which had been previously victimized by the same partner they were with currently. And here's a little handy graph that depicts those statistics for you. But that is an entirely separate issue, and I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a minute and scold those women. Listen, women, if you want to stop being the victim, then stop being a victim and leave the douchebag who keeps hurting you. Do whatever you have to get away and get on your feet. That's what transitional female housing is for anyway, right? To help you get on your feet. So, logic stands to reason, you shouldn't go back to Joe Schmo ever again, who you know is never going to change and always going to be the same asshole that you got beat up by. And therefore, women's shelters are overflowing with people, and the men's shelters have beds to spare is one of the ways this plays out. Gender and its concepts and contexts are very important when talking about domestic violence. No, it's not. Whether the violence is perpetrated by a man, woman, genderqueer, or other non-binary person, domestic violence is always a gendered issue, and that needs to be taken into account. No, it doesn't, and no, it's not. Did you get beat by a significant other? Here's a bed, we'll help you through. It should be that simple, but for some reason you've prioritized certain genitals over others, and that's not cool. It needs to stop. It is no coincidence that women are much more likely to be survivors than men. Interpersonal violence has strong roots in sexism and colonialism. No, it has its roots in the mindset of, oh, I can change him if I give him just one more chance. No, get out of there. Get your kids out of there. Joe got one chance. He blew it in the moment he endangered someone's life and safety. That has nothing to do with sexism or colonialism, and your argument to the contrary is extremely lacking. Domestic violence is one enactment of patriarchy. Here we go. Where someone, most often a woman, is robbed of her personhood and treated like possession of her, most often male, abuser. You see, the only person making this into a gendered issue is you and whatever odd feminist that you got this inspiration from. And it's simply not a gendered issue. Men can be assholes. Females can be assholes. Whatever odd gender can be an asshole. Everyone has the propensity for violence and to hurt someone else. The difference between those who do and those who don't is called autonomy, independence of thought. You see, independence of thought, autonomy, that's something that you should acquire a little bit of because it's glaringly obvious which think tank you fished that idea out of. We live in a culture where boys are advertised to by telling them a product will help them get girls, where objectification of women in advertisement is still rampant. Have you not experienced the glory of Nightwing? I objectify him so hard that he is a poster on my wall back in my bedroom at home. What a glorious butt. Anyway, when women still have to deal with so much harassment just walking down the street. Funnily enough, I've never had to deal with street harassment. Mind you, and this is going to make my ego look extremely bulbous. bulbous. I'm not half bad looking. That being said, either there is something wrong with your research method or something's wrong with your conclusion. Either way, something is wrong. It is clear that things are not equal, and domestic violence is yet another one of those problematic petals on patriarchy's gross flowers. No matter who the perpetrators or survivors are, toxic masculinity, humanity, is always a part of domestic violence, and I am skeptical that a shelter for men would spend time indicating the system that makes domestic violence so common, i.e. patriarchy, humanity, beyond dealing with the stigma that male survivors face. Maybe I am wrong about this. You know what? Finally, we are on the same page. And maybe this is a super feminist men's shelter. Why does it have to be feminist, though? That's my question. I hope that I am, even though all survivors of domestic violence deserve safe spaces to heal and services that will help them with whatever needs they have. In a reality where resources are scarce, we need to be careful with what we prioritize. Yeah, and you'd like to prioritize women, wouldn't you? It is also crucial that the gendered aspects of domestic violence are at the forefront so we can attack the toxic elements of masculinity at its roots as we work towards a world without interpersonal violence. You want to know how we get rid of sexism? We stop talking about it. I'm not a victim of male oppression. You're not a victim of male oppression. Men aren't victims of female oppression. No one's a victim, okay? No one's issues are gendered. They're just shitty situations and we're working on fixing them. Take a leaf out of Morgan Freeman's book, why don't ya? Okay, so that's this week's video of #EverythingIsSexist. If you have an idea for a video that you want me to do, whether it be an anecdote, a video, an article, or what have yous, you can email me at weebo0jones@gmail.com with the subject line #EverythingIsSexist, or at me on Twitter or on mine's @weebojones with the #EverythingIsSexist. Cool.